Let me pray. Our gracious God, we come before you today, very frail and very sinful people. Yet we know you have made us for so much more than this. So we ask for your special help once again as we turn to your word. Please transform our hearts through your Spirit so that our behaviour will be pleasing in your sight. Amen. I want to begin with a story. This is a true story. It's from Charles Spurgeon's biography. Now, Charles Spurgeon, I've mentioned him before. He was a Baptist preacher from the late 1800s. And this story is of two men who were going past his church one Sunday morning on a bus. And as they were going past, they were looking at the crowds outside Spurgeon's church. And one of the gentlemen said to the other one, a hypocrite always draws a crowd. He was very critical of Spurgeon and his church. But then the other man responded by saying, would you not be pleased if your business attracted that many customers? He said that man would not have that many people coming to his church unless the people were happy with his preaching and were going away changed. And so the critic then took himself off to that church the following Sunday to check it out, where he subsequently heard the gospel and became a Christian. And he later on gave his testimony in that church. Now, the reason I tell that story is because God uses his people to draw others in. So take Joe Rogan, for example. Joe Rogan is the biggest podcaster in the world today. He is not a confessing Christian, but he started going to church several months ago. And he's told a couple of his guests how lovely the Christians are at his church. He said he's just shocked at how polite everyone is getting out of the car park of a Sunday morning. Right? And the point is, when Christians are living God's way, they are incredibly attractive to outsiders. All right? Outsiders are drawn to churches where the people in those churches are behaving the way God calls them to. But here's the million-dollar question. How do we become this type of people? See, what Paul is asking in this passage is for us to change almost everything about ourselves. And there is no mission on this earth that is more certain to fail than to expect human nature to change. Right, I've shared this with you before, but Jordan Peterson, when he was working as a clinical psychologist, he would tell his clients, look, just pick one thing about yourself to focus on and see if you can change that. And his clients would say, what are you talking about? I've got a litany of issues and you just want me to really reduce it down to one thing? And Jordan Peterson would say, look, even changing one thing about yourself is next to impossible. Yeah, that's what Paul is calling for in this chapter. He's telling us how to live, okay? See, notice Paul doesn't tell Titus to teach sound doctrine in this chapter. That's what he did in last chapter, chapter 1, verse 9. What does he say in chapter 2, verse 1? You, however, must teach what is appropriate to sound doctrine. Now, what does that mean? It means he's telling us how sound doctrine should impact our behavior, our lives. And guys, we should have zero expectations that we will be able to do even one of these things in this chapter. Right? There is no mission on this earth more certain to fail than expecting human nature to change. And this is why Paul spends the second half of this chapter telling us how God helps us change. So Titus chapter 2, it's one of my most favorite, probably top 5 most favorite chapters in the Bible. Because it doesn't just tell us how to live, it tells us that when we become a Christian, God comes and transforms our heart so that we want to live the way God calls us to, right? God doesn't just give us the rules, he gives us the ability to follow them. And so verses 11 to 15 help us become the kind of people that others want to come and be a part of. And so these two sections, we got verses 1 to 10 and verses 11 to 15. These are our 2 points for today's sermon, as your sermon outline suggests. Now, some of you may be feeling a little ripped off. What do you mean, only 2 points, Brendan? Come on. You'll be happy to know that point 1 is broken into 6 subpoints. So you can kid yourself, it's a 7-point sermon today. You're getting more than usual. But anyway, the 2 points are, what does God want us to do and how does God help us do it? Right? So if we here at Irwin Anglican want to be the kind of place that others want to come and be a part of, which I think we are, how do we continue to do that? Well, please come with me as we look at the what and the how of good, godly behaviour. And our passage begins with Paul telling Titus what is appropriate to sound doctrine. How are we to behave in light of sound doctrine? And Paul addresses 6 different groups, and each of these groups gets their own tailored application. So usually we finish sermons here with application, but Paul starts up front. The first half of his chapter is all about application. So the next half of this sermon is going to be all about application. And he starts by looking at older men. Now, what's he referring to when he says older men? What's the cutoff? When do we become older men? I used to be able to kid myself that I was still young, all right? I used to be able to kid myself that I could still run around like a 20-year-old and I could still back up from injuries like a 20-year-old. That finished when I was 40. When I turned 40, couldn't back up anymore. So is 40 the cutoff? Right? And most of us here, okay, we can switch off for the next couple of minutes, Brendan. Well, when we look at what he says to older men, in a nutshell, he's saying, be a role model to people who are younger than you. And so what he's about to tell to older men, it applies just as much to youth leaders as it does to octo or nonagenarians, right? We can all learn something from this. So what do we learn? Well, the first thing we hear about older men is they are to be temperate. Now, what does that mean? Well, some of you may have heard of the temperance movement many, many decades ago. The temperance movement was when they abolished alcohol. It means no alcohol. And so to be temperate, it means don't get drunk. All right? Older men don't get drunk. Second, be worthy of respect. Right? Basically, be the kind of person that younger people look up to. If you're a youth leader, be the kind of person that your youth look up to, right? Be a role model. Third, be self-controlled. Now, that literally means to be sensible, right? Make sure your words and your actions are sensible. Don't speak or act flippantly or foolishly. Be sensible. And then 4, don't just be a role model in your conduct, be a role model in your faith, your love, and your endurance. Now, why would he say this to older men? It's because it's very easy for older men to give up. Did you know the demographic that has the highest suicide rate on the planet? It's men over the age of 85. The second highest is men in their late 50s. Right? Paul's point here is don't give up. You see, our culture, Western culture, undervalues the elderly today. We just want to push them out, stick them in a home, euthanize them. We don't honor the elderly anymore. But what God says is the wisdom and the experience and the leadership and the security that older men can bring means they can be of enormous benefit to a household, a church, and society at large. All right? So, your job, older men, is to be a role model. Second category Paul addresses is older women, verse 3. And in the same way, older women are to be role models as well. So to begin with, they are to be reverent. Now, what does that mean? It means understand that you have a sacred role in the family, in the church, and in society. All right, there's a message or messaging that just gets bandied around on the internet a lot these days that says that if a woman is over the age of 40, then she is, quote, past her prime. Ladies, please do not listen to that. That is utter rubbish. All right? Older ladies have a sacred role to play in our society. Next, don't be slanderers. All right? So where men often exert our power through physical means, women often exert their power through verbal means and verbal attacks. And look, when society says hurtful things to you, like you're past your prime, it can very easily lead you to say hurtful things to others. But what God says here is reverent women keep themselves from gossip and slander. In the same way, hurt people will often drown their sorrows in alcohol. Now, the literal phrase that he uses here is don't be addicted. It's actually literally don't be enslaved. It's the doulos word, right? Don't be we talked about doulos last week. It actually means slave. Don't be enslaved to much wine. And so, to the older ladies, right? Is dry July an easy thing for you or a hard thing for you? Because if it's a hard thing, then maybe you are enslaved to alcohol. And then finally, older ladies are to teach the younger ladies. Now notice, Paul doesn't tell Titus to teach the younger ladies. It's interesting. He very wisely says older women are to teach the younger women. Now, when we've had mentoring programs here in the past, it has sometimes been very difficult to get the younger women to take an interest in being mentored by the older women. They don't take an interest in older women. But older women, you are called here to take an interest in younger women. Be role models to them. Right, this brings us to the third group that Paul addresses, which is younger women, verses 4 and 5, sorry. And the first thing they need to be taught is to love their husbands and children. Now, I can imagine it can be quite difficult to continue to love your husbands and children decade after decade. All right? But since no-fault divorce was introduced back in the 70s, the divorce rate has gone up, I think, something like 400%. And according to a study in the US, 70% of divorces are instigated by women. And that number goes up to 90% for university-educated women. Now, don't hear me wrong. Some women need to get divorced if their husband is abusive or an adulterer. But if they're not, younger women need to be taught to keep loving their husbands and children. Second thing is in verse 5, it says to be self-controlled and pure. All right, what does pure mean? It means don't be immoral. Now, there are many different ways that young women can be immoral. For example, don't sleep around before marriage. Okay. Thirdly, be busy at home. Now, there's a controversial one. Might get some people's backs up. What does it mean? Does that mean women are not allowed to work outside the home? Well, it can't mean that because the woman of Proverbs 31 works outside the home. You're allowed to. Right? I think a better translation is be devoted to the home. What does that mean? It means don't neglect the home. Right? As a wife and mother, if you are neglecting your husband or neglecting your kids because you really want to chase a career or you really want to chase money, then that is a serious failure. Don't neglect the home. And then lastly, younger ladies are taught to be subject to their husbands. Now, the Greek word here is very specific. It means to place yourself under your husband. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean you're inferior to your husband? No. Because we are to place ourselves under all authorities. Doesn't mean the Prime Minister is any better than us or the police are any better than us. We just have to submit to their authority. In the same way, younger ladies need to be taught to let their husbands be the head of the household. All right, this brings us to the fourth group Paul addresses, younger men. So notice, he's given older men 4 things to do. He's given older women 4 things to do. He's given younger women 4 things to do. What does he say to younger men? Verse 6, similarly, encourage the younger men to be self-controlled. That's it. You have one job, young men. Be self-controlled. Be sensible. And let's be honest, even that is an impossibility for most young men. Right? Young men have so much testosterone coursing through their veins, they have enough to power a small city, and it just wreaks havoc. So younger men, here's what I want to ask you. What things do you struggle with in terms of self-control? Right? Do you have anger issues? Do you struggle with porn? Do you do dumb things to show off to your mates? Unsensible things like speeding or driving erratically? Do you try to prove yourself to women in dumb ways? How many hours do you spend gaming each day? Right? You have one job, young men. Be sensible. Be self-controlled. The fifth category Paul addresses is Titus, who's the minister. Right? Now, what does he say for ministers? Ministers are ensure their teaching and their conduct are above reproach. Their talk and their walk needs to be of such integrity that even if someone throws mud at them, it doesn't stick. Right? Be above reproach. And then finally, in verses 9 and 10, Paul addresses slaves. Now, again, controversial. What do you mean you're talking to slaves here, Paul? Does that mean you're condoning slavery, like black slavery? Well, it doesn't mean that, as some very wrongly claim. So if you want to write these references down elsewhere, so in 1 Corinthians 7, Paul tells slaves, if you can get your freedom, get your freedom. Don't stay a slave, in 1 Corinthians 7. And then in 1 Timothy 1, he lists slave traders alongside adulterers, perverts, and murderers. All right, you cannot get a stronger condemnation of slavery than saying all slave traders are going to hell. He is not about condoning slavery. Now, the reason he doesn't try and abolish slavery in this passage is because that's not his agenda here. All right, that is a big agenda. Getting rid of slavery in the Roman Empire. Paul's agenda here is to outline what godly behavior looks like for all pockets of society. And contrary to the culture of his day, Paul says even slaves have a role to play in society. So, what is that role? Well, be honest. Don't steal from your masters. Be respectful. Don't talk back to your masters. And serve well. Try to please your masters. And let's be honest, we can apply all those things to our modern day workplace or school, can't we? Right? How can we ensure that our behavior at work or at uni or at school makes the teaching about God, our Savior, attractive? Verse 10. That's what God wants us to do as faithful disciples. It's not an exhaustive list, of course, but it's a good summary of what it means to live in accordance with or, according to sound doctrine. And so our application for today, first bit anyway, is to go home, either today or tomorrow, and reread this passage, particularly the verses that relate to you. If you're male, read the bits about the males. If you're female, read the bits about the females, and start doing them. However, being told what to do is easier said than done, isn't it? So imagine this way. Let's picture a local high school that gets into the news for all the wrong reasons because there's a scandal. Imagine one of the students has done something really scandalous, so scandalous they've been expelled and got on the news. And then the headmaster or the headmistress stands up in front of the whole class, the whole school, and says, now, children, I want you to be good boys and girls from now on. What expectation do you think we should have that would actually work? Zero, right? Right? Simply being told to be good is easier said than done. And the reason being, telling people to be good focuses on the outside. And that's what Paul has been doing for verses 1 to 10. He's focusing on the outside. But he doesn't end there because God focuses on the inside. And what I mean is, he doesn't just give us a list of do's and don'ts, he helps us to follow them too. And that's what 11 to 15 is talking about. It's talking about changing us from the inside. So read it with me. I'm just going to read verses 11 and 12 to start with. What does he say? For the grace of God has appeared, that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age. Now, the grace of God that has appeared, right, has appeared and offered salvation. Well, that's, of course, Jesus, isn't it? That's Jesus' first coming, I should say. So when Jesus appeared some 2,000 years ago, that is what teaches us to say no to ungodliness and yes to living godly lives. But it's not just Jesus' first coming that does this. So verse 13, right down the bottom, while we await for the blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. So Jesus' second coming, Jesus' second appearance also helps us say no to ungodliness and yes to lead godly lives. I think it was John Calvin that said this passage here, it's sort of a push-pull scenario. So the grace of God, of Christ, right, he's the cross of Christ pushes us to godly behavior, and the glory of Christ that we look forward to when he returns pulls us to godly behavior. And it does so in many different ways. Now, due to time constraints, we'd be here all night. I'm just going to share 4 ways in which this does us. All right, so this is 4 ways in which God helps transform our hearts so that we actually want to be the kind of people that he outlines in verses 1 to 10. We want to be the kind of people that others want to come and be a part of. All right, 4 ways. I'm going to start with the pull, which is to do with the glory to come. And when we understand the glory that is to come, what that does is it reminds us, it tells us, it teaches us that this present age is not worth dying for. It's not worth selling your soul for. The things that this world has to offer are not worth chasing after. Right? Our citizenship is in heaven. It's not in this world. It's in the world to come. And so the glory, the coming glory of Christ pulls us to godly living by reminding us, don't chase after the sinful things this world has to offer. They're not worth it. All right? Inside changing. So that's one way that the glory pulls us to godly behavior. There are other ways that we can look at some other time. Let me now look at 3 ways in which the grace of Christ pushes us to godly behavior. And the first is that the cross of Christ lowers our interest in sin. What I mean is this. When we look at what Jesus went through to save us, our love for him grows. Right? How can you not fall in love with someone who has given his all for you? And as our love for him grows, what happens is he incrementally becomes our ultimate treasure, right? When you become a Christian, Jesus doesn't automatically become your ultimate treasure. That's what our vision statement is. It's not a current statement. It's a vision statement. It's what we want to see. We want to see us incrementally having Jesus more and more as our ultimate treasure. And as we treasure Christ more, what happens to the sin of this life is it starts to become less and less appealing. Right? We actually sing about this. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of this world will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. That's the push and the pull there. All right? So that's the first way it changes us. It just lowers, it doesn't delete, but it lowers our interest in sin. The second way the grace of God pushes us to godliness is through the rally cry to take up your cross and follow him. And this call inspires us to be better. Like, have you ever wondered why movies like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and Marvel are so popular? It's because they're about hero quests. And when we see people being a hero, it inspires us to heroism as well. We want to do what they're doing. We want to be Captain America or Superman. So what is it that Captain America and Superman do that are so heroic? Well, I think a hero can be broken down into 2 main things. Number 1, they sacrifice themselves, they put themselves second in order to do the right thing. Right? They always do the right thing. And guys, that's what Jesus did for us. He sacrificed himself on the cross to bring us salvation. And he calls us to do the same. This is Matthew 16:24. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Right? And so when we see Jesus sacrificing himself to save us, it inspires us to want to be heroic like that too. Now, how do we do that? Well, we deny ourselves the enjoyment that sin brings. Right? Sin is enjoyable. If it wasn't enjoyable, no one would do it. And so we say, all right, I'm going to deny myself the enjoyment that sin brings in order to do the right thing. And when we're doing that, we're taking up our cross and following in the footsteps of the great superhero. The third and final way, these are not the only ways, but the third one I want to look at today, in which God, the grace of God, pushes us to godliness, is that the cross makes us want to repay him. Let me explain. In the movie Saving Private Ryan, towards the end, pretty much all of Captain Miller's platoon have been killed trying to save Private Ryan. And as Miller is lying there dying, so he's played by Tom Hanks, all right? His last words to Ryan are, earn this. Earn the sacrifice made for you. And then the movie fades into a now aged saving, like Private Ryan, standing over the grave of Captain Miller in the war memorial. And he's talking to the cross, Miller's cross, and he says, every day I think of what you said to me that day on the bridge. And I've tried to live my life the best I could. I hope that's enough. I hope in your eyes I've earned what you all have done for me. Now, brothers and sisters, we don't need to live a good life in order to earn our salvation, right? Just like Ryan didn't. He'd already been given his salvation. But like Private Ryan, how do we respond to that sacrifice? Well, it's by living the best life that we can. But the grace of Christ helps us say no to ungodliness because it is right and fitting for Christians to live godly lives, given what Jesus sacrificed to save us. Now, we can't do this perfectly, right? Even though we know this world is not worth selling our soul for, even though we have the sin of this world growing strangely dim, even though we want to strive after being heroic like Jesus and taking up our cross, and even though we know it is right and fitting to live godly lives, we don't do it perfectly. We never will this side of heaven. So where do we start? What do we do? Well, here's the last bit of application for tonight as we are closing. So when you are rereading this passage tonight or tomorrow, right? Boys, read the bits about boys. Girls, read the bits about girls. When you're doing that, do these three things, 3 pieces of application as we close. Number 1, don't be overly hard on yourself. You and I are going to stuff up. And God knows we're going to stuff up. Right? He knows we will not reach perfection this side of heaven. But we're going to need God's help to strive. So we need to pray. All right? Pray hard that God will transform our hearts each and every day to work in us what is pleasing to him. And then thirdly, don't focus on how we're not living up to this standard. Focus on how Jesus lived up to it perfectly. Don't focus on our performance, because that'll just ruin us. Focus on Jesus' performance. And when we do that, when we fix our eyes on Jesus, the Spirit will help us become the kind of people that others want to come and be a part of. So this week and beyond, turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of this world will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace.